Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, March 27th, 2026, going up on a Saturday, and once again being filmed on a Saturday. This is, taking away from what I want to do, which is to film on Fridays at a different time of the day. But instead, I was scrambling to finish at least one book I could talk about in this video. So I had to film today in the morning quickly before I get on to other things. And that means, once again, for the third time in a row, my face and body are here in shadow, but probably as I talk, the light will shift more onto me in weird ways. But I hope I won't be here too long. This will be a pretty short and sweet video because, as I said, I scrambled to finish just one book I could talk about. I am starting a couple of other books at the tail end of March, so I am expecting to do a March reading wrap-up in the beginning of April as well. But regardless, I do like checking in weekly with these AM reading videos, especially because I have tacked on a special little segment at the very beginning of these videos, and that is I read a short story from this, any literary journal. And currently I am reading from Ploughshares. This is the Spring 2025 edition. And this week the story I read was Lorca's Guitar by Marjorie Sandor. And this story is an homage to a Spanish socialist poet, Federica Garcia Lorca, who lived at the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. And then he was, I guess, technically disappeared because they don't know exactly what happened to him, and his body was never found. But this was in 1935, and there's a lot of speculation about what exactly happened. You know, it was a time of rising nationalism in Spain, and he was this socialist poet, and also he was gay, so maybe that had something to do with it, but none of that's fully known. But anyway, this all I found out through very brief research, so I don't know much, and I just looked it up because I could tell from the story. I wondered, this seems familiar in a way that goes beyond fiction. So what the author is doing here is dramatizing, also she's speaking of Lorca as a ghost. And Lorca is going back to New York, where he lived for a little while before returning to Spain near the end of his life. And so in this story, he goes to a museum, which I think it is holding a guitar and pictures of cartoon cats, which are attributed to him. And he's just sort of pining over, missing home. And there's just a sense of sorrow in this poem about how, things are left unsaid and how he disappears from places forever. And it's just a lot of lyrical imagery. And then, Lorca's guitar is actually a direct reference to one of his famous poems, which is also about sorrow and about his Andalusian homeland, and I'll link to the poem down below. So I found it, sort of fleetingly moving, but this sort of experimental style of fiction doesn't really hold up for me much beyond that. The book I finished and can talk about, huzzah, is Love Marriage by V.V. Ganeshananthan. This is a book that's been on my Goodreads TBR for a while, so that it made it to my top of the Goodreads resolution that I make for myself every year to, shave off, those top books. And V.V. Ganeshananthan was, and I believe is, the host of the podcast Fiction Nonfiction, or a co-host. And so I put her first novel on my TBR, actually before her second novel was published, which I've since read. That was Brotherless Night. And I have to admit, I like Brotherless Night better than Love Marriage, maybe for the same sort of reasons as the story I just talked about. I mean, I wouldn't say this is quite as experimental, but it is comprised of vignettes, and they're all very exposition heavy, and so there's a fleetingness to this story, which at least actually made it somewhat quick to read as I was dashing through sort of a, last minute attempt here, because I'm also trying to finish up the BookTube prize, but more on that later. But anyway, Love Marriage is told from the perspective of Yalini. She is the daughter of Sri Lankan immigrants, and a lot of the crux of the story is her going back into the past and describing the complex marriages and lives of her ancestors, and particularly how they intersected with the Sri Lankan politics of the time for the Tamil minority, which culminates the year of Yalini's and my birth in 1983, where there was a horrible massacre of the Tamil people by the Sri Lankan majority that was almost pretty much done with government approval. And this is also the time when the militant group, the Tamil Tigers, became much more of a big thing in reaction to that. And, in the international world, the Tamil Tigers are, labeled largely as terrorists for suicide bombings and all sorts of things. And they also even targeted their own people who, stood up to them or disagreed with them in any way. So, but I think Ganeshananthan in both of her books, she talks about the complexity and how the Tamil, a lot of the Tamil population, does feel some affinity for this militant group that, is standing up, like, in their name against oppression. And so the second book, I'll leave my review down below. It's a lot more of a standard story where we're following, narrative action mostly, on the page, where a character is going through a situation, whereas here, Yalini is mostly talking to her parents and to her uncle, and then, everything about this is her almost like writing diary entries about her ancestors and their love lives, because something else, I guess, Ganeshananthan is saying is complicated is the idea of marriage, and arranged marriage to love matches, and, Yalini's parents in particular, they decided to marry on their own, and there was some tension in their families, including her uncle, Tamil Tiger, who went after her father, like, how dare you marry my sister and take her away from me. The most sort of present day story, on the page plot has to do with Yalini's uncle as an older man who has cancer, and he has thus been released from the Tigers. And he decides to come to Canada. He can't come to America where Yalini and her parents live because the Tigers are considered a terrorist organization. But at the time of this story, Canada was letting them in. And so he was there basically on a humanitarian, sort of visa or what have you, because he was dying of cancer. And finally, he was able to meet up with his sister again, and his sister brought Yalini, and Yalini starts to learn about the family and kind of, question in a way these complicated relationships, both when it comes to, the interpersonal stuff around marriage and other means in the family, and then also how the politics interplays in that. And I think, for me, it would have been a much stronger story if Ganeshananthan had done what she did in the second book more, which is just tell the story on the page of Yalini's, perspective as a American Sri Lankan Tamil young woman. Her perspective being widened by actually meeting her uncle, who is a Tamil Tiger, and especially her cousin, Giovanni, who is also very kind of militant in her way and is actually entering into another sort of marriage, and her marriage is wanting to marry somebody who has Tiger loyalties abroad as a way to honor her father, and why she's doing that. And just to have been able to explore that and explore the sort of aftermath, or, the progression of the cousin's engagement and the progression of the uncle's illness, but also centering Yalini a little more too. I think that would have spoken to me a bit more. I feel like instead these really kind of, well, rambling, but although some of the vignettes are pretty short, but there's a rambling quality because this is very much told almost like epistolary style. It's almost like Yelena is writing in a diary about her ancestors, and so we're not, witnessing them living life on the stage. We're, very passive observers, as is Yelena. Sometimes with very beautiful, thoughtful language about relationships and politics and what have you, but it just, isn't enough to hold my attention. Maybe there's, maybe it's arguable to say that that has to do with, I often angst about, what the screens are doing to my attention span, but I also feel like there's some, beauty in and of itself in, exploring a character more naturally through, letting them be the star of the story and see them change in real time. And that's my argument. I feel like I still very much grasp onto those situations and those characters and get something meaningful out of them, and arguably maybe something more meaningful than I ultimately got out of how it was displayed in this book. And the final book I'll talk about is Paper Girls. This is a memoir of a fractured family in America by Beth Macy. Hopefully I got that subtitle right, and hopefully you can see the image in this lighting, which I am reading this book, of course, on audio, because that's the only way I could get it. But yes, this is a memoir. It takes place in basically the Bible Belt in rural America in Ohio, Urbana, Ohio, where the the narrator, Beth Macy, she's a journalist, and she is going home around the time of COVID, I think, to chronicle the realities of her very depressed hometown. She's looking into such things as the opioid crisis. She's looking into decreased opportunities, like a lot fewer students graduating high school, and the economic downturns, and the rise of maybe right-wing conspiracy theories. So that's the sort of stuff she is looking into and trying to understand what has come of the home that she was last grew up in, and really called her primary home, I think, more concretely in the 70s and 80s, and now she's back in the 2020s. And anyway, enough rambling. That's all I really should say about this book anyway, because I am reading it for the BookTube Prize. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard in 2019 as a way for the Literary Bookternet to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published in US in English the year before. So this year, for 2026, we are judging 2025 releases. We have 2 long lists for each division of 48 books per division. And then through 4 rounds throughout the year, we whittle them down to winners and runners-up. And as I speak to you, we are very much at the tail end of round 1, which is the octafinals. And I have just a couple of days to finish up this book and then submit my ballot to Robert. And then the idea of submitting the ballot is that then me and my fellow judges, our conglomerate opinion, will then choose 3 books to advance to the next round, the quarterfinals. And the same will happen, of course, across all of the ballots. The ballots are 6 books apiece, so I will be pitching Paper Girls against 5 other books that I've previously talked about and mostly just teased, because as an official judge I have to zip my lips so that I don't influence other judges. However, I did give some preliminary thoughts about my entire ballot before I started reading any of the books, so I'll link to that video down below, as well as the link to the BookTube Prize in case you'd like more information on that. So that about covers it for me now. Yes, as promised, I guess. Yeah, the sun is doing weirder things on my face now that I've been talking for a little while, so I think it's a good time to stop, and I'm hopefully very much expecting in the next video that I'll be in a much more normal lighting situation. And speaking of, expect me back on this channel in the next couple of days for my March book haul video. Stay tuned for that. And I hope that all of you are enjoying the end of your March reading as the month is wrapping up. I feel like for me it's been a little bit but I am kind of hopeful for the books that I will be starting at the end of the month, and putting a lot of hopes on them, I suppose, and hopefully that'll pan out and I'll be able to talk about them in my wrap-up in a positive way. In the meantime, I hope you have all been enjoying your reading. Have I said that? I mean it. And I hope my fellow BookTube Prize judges are doing very well, or have already completed their and submitted their ballots, or like me, are getting there. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.